Good morning, everyone. So looking forward to the series on HPA, or hypothalamus, pituitary, and adrenal axis. We're going to learn so much in this series. This should have about 10 parts, which will include several things, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. But today, let's get started with just a relaxation time where we can calm our adrenals and ground ourselves and be prepared and focused for today's lesson. So if you'll just find a comfortable spot, wiggle a little bit if you need to, relax, ground your feet. I have little a cushion my feet sit on because my chair is a little bit high. And just close your eyes and focus on your breathing. And we're going to take a deep, long breath in and hold it for just a few seconds, and then slowly blow it out through your mouth. Feel the tension in your shoulders getting less. We'll do this again. Deep breath through your nose. Hold it for just a few seconds and blow it out through your mouth. While you're blowing it out, feel the tension leaving your body. Notice the breath going in and out of your lungs, the feeling. You might even feel some tingling because you're getting some oxygen you haven't gotten in a few days. We'll do another deep breath. Hold and blow out slowly. Feeling that tension releasing in your body. Now we're going to take a few moments to focus. Feel what pressures you feel. I feel pressure on my bum, sitting in my chair, on my feet, where my feet are in my cushion. You might feel a little pressure from some sinus in your head. Just notice what you're feeling in your body. Continue to just breathe, getting oxygen everywhere. Notice if you're feeling tingly in your extremities. Sometimes I'll feel tingly in my fingers. And just notice it. It means that you're finally getting oxygen there. Now we're going to bring our focus to our class while we prepare to open our eyes and just focus. Maybe one last breath. Bringing our attention to our class today. All right. Hello, everyone. Today we're going to start with our HPA Axis Recovery course. This is about 10 sessions, and I'm so glad you're here. This is our first module, Foundations of Hypothalamus, Pituitary, and Adrenal Axis for our health. This first module, we're going to be building a foundation so that you can learn what the HPA axis is, why it matters, and how to tell when it's out of balance. We're going to keep it simple and practical and empowering, because understanding our stress and how our systems work is our very first step to healing it. So let's begin our journey together with compassion, curiosity, and the belief that healing is always possible. So what is, and get this to move, what is the HPA axis? And that's a big question. I'm going to try to do this in the simplest of terms. Okay, so H is hypothalamus, P is pituitary, and A is adrenals. And the three of them connect together and have this extremely fast communication system so that it can keep your body regulated. So the primary purpose is to regulate the part of our body that responds to stress. It also controls things like cortisol levels, energy, our inflammation in our body, and our immune function. So it has a lot of important pieces, right? So it is really a communication network between these three glands. The hypothalamus and the pituitary are both in the brain, okay? And then the adrenal glands sit on top of our kidneys. Let me just make this a little bit bigger so you can see it. There we go. You don't need to see as much of me. So you can see here, our hypothalamus and pituitary are in our brain, and then our adrenal glands sit on top of our kidneys. Now, when you experience stress, this whole system goes into play and it helps the body respond appropriately, hopefully, when it's healthy, whether that's a fight or flight response where you're running from danger or adjusting to a challenge. It's your internal alarm system, if you will, that manages not just stress hormones like cortisol, but also how much energy you have, what your mood is, your immune system, and even your metabolism. So people that are struggling with metabolism may find that their bodies are in a stress response or a sympathetic response, or that their HPA is not working together nicely or communicating properly. And sometimes when we are reacting too often to chronic stress, and we'll talk a little bit more about this in a minute, then this whole thing turns off and stops working properly. But typically, the HPA axis, when you're in danger, it turns on, and when things are calm, it turns off. And it creates what's called a parasympathetic response or a calming response. So it's in that process of doing the excitable or sympathetic response of, hey, I got to run, to, okay, I need to calm down. So if you can imagine driving down the road and somebody, you probably don't have to imagine this. This is probably something you've experienced. A car runs in front of you, pulls in front of you and slams their brakes on, and you're like, I gotta stop. And you almost hit this car, but you don't. That whole thing happens. It's a split second, but you feel your heart racing, you feel, stress everywhere, your breathing changes, a whole bunch of things are happening. And when those things happen, that's the HPA axis communicating through these three key glands, creating your stress response and allowing you to prepare for what might happen next. Once the danger is over, you go, whoa, that was rough. And you start to shake or you start feeling some kind of offness. Okay. And so what ends up happening is now the body's going, okay, now we have to calm you down. And so sometimes when that happens to me, I might pull off into a parking lot to just kind of take a few breaths and calm down a little bit. That's a typical and a normal way that our body's supposed to respond. And there are some, like, we'll get into this a little more when we get into this course farther, but there's some really specific things that are happening, and we'll talk about those things that are happening later on. But just understand that the HPA axis is these three glands working together to prepare your body for a danger, and then to calm your body down so that when the danger is past. That's the primary purpose. Right? So what is the role of cortisol in our body? Because that's the key hormone that is made that everybody is struggling with a lot of times. So cortisol is our get up and go hormone. It is a steroid hormone that's released by our adrenal glands. It gives us energy in the morning, and it's a cyclic hormone. So it gives us energy in the morning, and helps us to cope with physical or emotional stressors. And it also plays a crucial role in regulating our blood sugar, reducing inflammation, and maintaining immune balance. It regulates our sex hormones. So if your libido is low, almost always your cortisol levels are not where they're supposed to be. And when cortisol is in balance, you feel clear and calm and energized. But when it's out of balance, everything from sleep to digestion and mood can be affected. So cortisol imbalance helps to regulate our energy, our focus, our blood sugar, and inflammation. So let's talk just briefly about this natural rhythm that our cortisol takes. In the morning when we wake up, just before we wake up, our body shoots a burst of cortisol that begins to wake us up and give us energy to go in the morning. And midday, we might get another little burst of cortisol to keep us going, but usually not quite as much. So our cortisol levels should come up and then they start going down throughout the day. By evening, the cortisol level should be low and our body should start producing melatonin, which is a natural component of this rhythm. Okay, when melatonin hits our bloodstream in our body, then it helps us to go to sleep. But in the morning, the cortisol will hit. Now, if you're stressed, you might wake up every couple hours because every couple hours the cortisol is hitting. And the cortisol is like bursts into your body and you're awake, and now I'm awake and I'm awake. Like not just a little bit awake, but like not just I have to go to the bathroom, go back to bed, go back to sleep. Like I'm ready for the day. I need to start going again. And so when our cortisol rhythms are not in the right order or that we're stressed out, if you're running from a tiger, and I like to use this analogy, and you've probably seen it in some of the other videos, if you have to run from a tiger, sleeping is not an appropriate thing to do. So if you're in a stress response, you're in a go, which means you're going to wake up every 2 hours. You might get a cat nap, but then you're going to wake up every 2 hours because you need to get up and move again because you're in a stress response. And so people who wake up multiple times in the night or wake up and can't go back to sleep because their brain starts racing is because your cortisol is not regulating properly. All right. So how does stress affect our system or this specific system? So the HPA axis is designed, of course, for short bursts of stress, like slamming on the brakes that we talked about earlier, or giving a big presentation, making a speech in front of people. That's called acute stress. So it's helpful for short-term activation. We, wake up in the morning or have to do something. You get a little butterflies in your stomach. You have to stand in front of people. That's a normal stress or what's called acute stress. It comes and passes quickly, short term. But when stress becomes chronic, day after day of pressure with no break, caregiving, work stress, every day not getting a break, then the system begins to stay on high alert. And so that is called chronic stress. And chronic stress is like overload, and it creates a breakdown in the body. So when we have this long-term stress over and over and over, this is chronic stress. So day after day, we have pressure with no break. The system then stays in high alert, and it actually adjusts to stay in high alert the whole time. This leads to exhaustion. It disrupts our sleep, as I mentioned earlier. It disrupts our digestion. It creates constipation. It causes an overgrowth of candida. It creates memory issues, immune function issues, and even hormone issues like your libido, if that's something that you're struggling with. All right. So some of common causes of HPA dysfunction. It's typically not caused by just a single thing. Like it's typically not caused by just mental stress or just emotional stress, because it's also influenced by physical stressors as well. And typically we see this in people who have a leaky gut, or their blood sugar is out of balance, or they've had trauma that they haven't dealt with. Sometimes there's infections that we don't see in producing any symptoms, but those infections are low level and they're there, that create a stress on the body. Okay. Some people exercise too much, and I know that's crazy for me to say that, but if your adrenals, if your HPA is out of balance or not functioning properly, too much exercise can actually hurt your body. You can actually struggle and have issues because of the excess stress that you're putting on your body. And we'll talk about how to identify the best way to exercise when you're stressed out, and how to identify that and know when it's time to change how you're exercising. So excessive, when your system doesn't get a chance to fully recover, it becomes dysregulated over time. So you can see poor sleep, overwork, trauma, infections, blood sugar crashes, overexercising, stimulants, coffee, and lack of rest and recovery time are all connected and reasons why we might have an HPA dysfunction. Now, remember, just being emotionally stressed in the short term is not going to cause the problem. Typically, there are other issues causing the problem, which in turn create an emotional or mental stress. Remember, our brain and our gut are connected. Our brain and our body are not two separate things. So if you're struggling with one, you're probably struggling with the other two. All right, casual versus chronic stress. So everyone experiences stress. We all experience it. Stress is not bad necessarily. Short-term stress can be motivating or sometimes necessary to, get us to get things done. But chronic stress is the primary issue, especially when we don't get enough rest and recovery time. Think of it like revving the car engine 24/7 without ever turning it off. Eventually, it's going to start breaking down. So the short casual stress are those short-term quick stressors that resolve quickly. Chronic, again, ongoing pressure, no resolution. And when we keep chronic stress, it creates a breakdown in the HPA axis because it is activated too long. Cortisol flow and feedback loop. So this is a little harder to understand, but we're going to kind of talk a little bit about this more as we go in our series. When your brain detects a stressor, so you can see here the stressor occurs over on the right side, the hypothalamus sends a signal to the pituitary gland. That's in that signal is specifically a CRH. Okay, and you see that hypothalamus to the pituitary. It says CRH on the right there. That's the corticotropin releasing hormone. Okay, so that's a specific hormone that the hypothalamus creates and sends that signal to the pituitary to tell the pituitary, hey, you need to do something. When the pituitary receives the CRH, it then sends a signal to the adrenals, and that signal is the ACTH, which is the adrenocorticotropin hormone, ACTH. That hormone triggers the adrenals. Okay, then the adrenals, when they've gotten the ACTH trigger, they then in turn release the cortisol. And then the cortisol travels through our blood to our organs, and it gives us the ability to have energy. It energizes us so that we can run from the tiger or so that we can work for the day. All right. Once the cortisol is reached back to the brain says, okay, we've had enough, and it creates what's called a negative feedback loop, which is telling the hypothalamus to slow down the cortisol process. So the hypothalamus then sends signal to the pituitary, which sends signal to adrenal, to lower the amount of cortisol that's being made. Okay. Now, that's the loop. It's supposed to go that way. However, it doesn't always go that way when we've been in chronic stress, because chronic stress then disrupts that feedback loop and it causes cortisol imbalances. All right. When the cortisol travels through your bloodstream to help your body respond to whatever the stress is, it raises your blood sugar, it suppresses inflammation, it increases your alertness. Once the threat is gone, the cortisol returns to the brain and signals that the system to calm down, as I mentioned, creating that negative feedback loop or a stop. But when there's chronic stress, this loop begins to break down. The system either keeps firing, resulting in a high cortisol level, or gets so worn out that it stops responding altogether. And this leads to dysfunction. Okay? Either one, we are having dysfunction. Either our cortisol levels are too high and eventually we'll stop responding, or we've already made it past that and we're no longer responding and everything is low. And a lot of times we don't even know there are symptoms until we've reached the total dysfunction point where we are no longer producing enough cortisol to be able to function. And our energy levels are low and our libido is low and all of those things are showing up. So we really want to catch this before it gets worse than it is. All right, so simple definition. When the HPA axis isn't functioning properly, it doesn't respond to stress in a healthy, balanced way. Our cortisol levels may be too high or too low or fluctuate unpredictably between. So if you can imagine your home thermostat is stuck on heat during the summer, okay? It's uncomfortable and it's draining. That's kind of what it feels like when your internal stress response loses balance. Let's try a real life analogy. So if you can imagine your body is like a car. The stress response is the gas pedal. It helps you get moving in times of need or even in the morning because cortisol does that as well. But you also need breaks because you need to rest, you need to recover. Most of us don't take breaks. I heard years ago, you should have an hour every day to rest and take a break for self-care. You need a day every week. I think the powers that be, the creator, created a day every week that we're supposed to rest for the whole 24 hours. We should have a weekend every month and a week every 6 months of rest and recovery. But most of us don't do that. Most of us take our Saturday and Sunday between work trying to get all those projects done that, we needed to get done when we didn't have time. Just don't take the time. HPA dysfunction is like having your gas pedal stuck or your brakes are failing. You're always on. You're always going. And your system eventually will crash from overuse. And that leads to breakdown. So you can see my little drawing here. The guy's running, cars in front of him. There's no brakes. He can't stop. Stress. But typically we look more like this because we're really not a car and we're really not running in front of a car. But we are working ourselves into the grave. Our bodies are not made to do this. And if we don't make some changes, we will crash. So that's just a quick overview of some of the things we're going to learn. We're going to learn how to, recognize our symptoms. So we've learned the basics of how our stress response works, but from here we need to explore and recognize dysfunction in our body. how to gently support healing, and how to build daily rhythms that restore our energy. This course that we're going to continue doing is about progress, not perfection. We're not going to be able to be perfect. And you're already on the path because you're here today and you're watching this today. So I encourage you, keep coming back. If you can't catch it, watch the replay and the video, because there is so much to learn and you will begin the healing process. And I encourage you today to keep going. Have a wonderful and blessed day. I'm going to go ahead and turn off the recording